Hi everyone, how are you? Kyanite here, or the Tinkerman, as someone called me. Hence, I've gone with my Ranieri glasses this episode. So yeah, obviously, those of you guys who've been following will be aware of the fact that I kind of promised City, Chelsea, and Arsenal because it was an amazing run of games, and I said I'd do each one individually as an episode. So here we are, episode 20, which is meant to be the Arsenal game. As you can see, we lost 2-0. You'll see the highlights, and the reason why you'll see the highlights is because I recorded it. I just happened to forget to turn my bloody mic on. So, we lost 2-0. I'd already pressed save. It's not like I was going to replay it or anything like that. So, yeah, we had chances, to be honest, to at least draw the game. Didn't quite happen. And Icardi, the fact that Cavani and Icardi scored just really goes to show why, A, Arsenal are defending Premier League champions, and just B, it really goes to show the difference in quality between their side and our side. So, yeah, instead, this episode, I'm actually going to discuss my 4-4-2, or as I call it, Pellegrini's 4-4-2. It's obviously the same 4-4-2 we found success with in the Championship, and it's the same 4-4-2 we've been finding success with in the Premier League. So I think it's about time that I do a little bit of a tactics video. So let's take a quick look at the Arsenal highlights, and we'll come back and take a look at my tactics. So, as we can see, Arsenal really kicked things off with an amazing team. Bar maybe Oxlade-Chamberlain and Monreal. All the other players they had were world class, and it's very easy to see why they're the defending Premier League champions. Opposition instructions, I mean, we tried to make sure Bellerin was always on his weaker foot, Ozil, and going hard on players like Ozil and Cazorla, and try and keep Cavani tightly marked. But honestly, this Arsenal side is so goddamn good that I think there's only so much we could have done, team instruction-wise, and player instruction-wise, and opposition instruction-wise. We started things off by lowering our defensive line and starting off with a defensive mentality. That was it, and try and build into the game. But even though I told him to mark Cavani tightly, he somehow was unmarked 50 seconds in from a corner. And there we go, Cavani with his 21st goal of the season. He is currently the top scorer in the Premier League. And that's why Arsenal are second, quality side. But despite that, it kind of was typical Arsenal. Really good going forward, hopeless at the back, and Hope Akpan there should have scored. More like hopeless Akpan. Cavani with a shot from outside the box. Steele should have done better. But you know what? We kept attacking. We kept coming back at Arsenal. We felt like we could, despite being away from home, get an equaliser. Hopeless Akpan had a chance, blew it, and this time round, you guessed it, it was another central midfielder's opportunity, and Khedira probably could have carried on dribbling. Good save from Petr Cech, but Khedira really should have capitalised there. Was that our last chance? Nope, it wasn't. Andre Gray, Bellerin cleared the ball to James McLean, who played it back to Gray. Danny Graham shot, and Petr Cech tipped it straight onto the post. On another day, Danny Graham probably would have got an equaliser there. I couldn't really believe my luck. You could see I had my head in my hands, and second half, we carried on pushing forward. Andre Gray once again linking up with Danny Graham, and how he didn't even hit the target there, I don't know. And it was just basically the story of the game. We had our chances. We eventually, being 1-0 down, threw the kitchen sink at him, and Icardi scored. 2-0 loss. Right then, here we are. Shame about what happened at the Arsenal game, but what can you do? So, some people might be looking at this and thinking, wow, are you going through a tactic when you're ninth in the Premier League? But I think people who've kind of been watching, been a little bit more dedicated to the series, and if you've not been dedicated to the series, what's wrong with you? Be dedicated to the series. Click on my channel, go check out the other videos from episode 1. Will know that this tactic, even though we're only ninth, is brought me a lot of success. In the Championship, we were relegation candidates. In real life, with a similar team that we played with in last season, we're in the relegation zone. And it is very painful being a Blackburn Rovers season ticket holder. But we finished second. So it's safe to say it did very well in the Championship. We got promoted. We really didn't spend that much money because we really just didn't have it. We were quite fortunate to be able to sell Ben Marshall to Sunderland for $7 million, so that allowed us to bring players in. But when you look at the fees paid for different individual players, Andre Gray, our current top scorer from They Who Shall Not Be Named, only 1.4 million, etc., etc. It was only really Augustinson who we paid big bucks for, £8 million. which was really a big gamble. So in comparison to some of the other teams in the Premier League, we didn't actually spend that much money, and a lot of our players are still the same players we kind of had last season in the Championship. So to have just been promoted to be sat in 9th place, I personally think that's a pretty good turnaround, and we could easily still, dare I say it, finish in a Europa League spot if results in the second half of the season go our way and we beat the likes of your Southamptons, your Watfords and your West Broms and your Newcastles, who are up there kind of trying to upset things as well. So I guess the question is, why do I keep calling this my Pellegrini approach? Well, I'll put a link to this tactic in the description, and the reason why I call it the Pellegrini approach is because it's heavily based on Pellegrini's approach both at Villarreal, Real Madrid, and what he did at Man City. Except that Man City kind of did things a little bit differently, where instead of having 2 wide playmakers, he went for Jesus Navas as a winger on one side, because he felt like the Premier League was a bit different to the Spanish league, where rather than more control, more possession, he needed a little bit more directness. And of course, that's what Jesus Navas offered in that side, being able to just bomb down the wing and get balls into the box. Tactically, it's quite attacking, but on paper, you're meant to try and emphasise trying to retain possession whilst playing a short passing game as you'd expect. So let's just take a look at the default settings that we normally start off with. Obviously, in the Premier League, we've been playing on defensive and counter a lot. And those of you guys that watch my videos a lot will know that, well, I guess there's a reason why someone called me Tinkerman in the last episode, is because management style, I do believe it's important to change during games. I don't believe in just, throwing a tactic in and just waiting, doing nothing and hoping it'll magically work, because that's not what football management is about. So obviously when we switch to defensive, it has an effect on our tempo. Higher tempo in a defensive mentality is a lot slower than a higher tempo in an attacking mentality. And these are all things I've spoken about in my Klopp and Conte videos, and I might actually have a dedicated video on this, and I'm currently working on a Pochettino Spurs tactic as well, which when I find time should hopefully get uploaded. So going back to attacking, high line, offside trap, quite a narrow way of playing. And you think about 4-4-2s closing down, sometimes it's dangerous to close down too much in a 4-4-2 because you already lack a man in midfield. So if you end up closing down a little bit too much, you might end up leaving too much of a gap in front of the back four. But the idea is to play an attacking-minded, fluid style of football. High line, offside trap, yet remaining very narrow, quite different to a traditional 4-4-2. So when you think about a traditional 4-4-2, you kind of think of the English game, deep defending, lumping up to the big striker. This is actually quite a different style of 4-4-2. And the reason why we have wide playmakers as opposed to wingers, which you have in a traditional 4-4-2, in our 4-4-2 approach is, as well as the fact that we play with a narrow width, the idea is to try and hold on to the ball. It doesn't prioritise possession, but the idea is to try and keep the ball as much as possible, because if your opponents can't get the ball, they can't score, right? But rather than be playing with a controlled manner, a controlled approach, packing the midfield, the idea is to do that and to pack the midfield by utilising interiores, as they were called in Spain, which means interior wingers or interior wide players, interior playmakers. And the idea behind this is use your fullbacks that push forward for width. Because in a traditional 4-4-2, you might get overlapping fullbacks, but in the FM match engine, if you play with overlapping fullbacks and wingers, then you essentially don't really end up with the wingers cutting inside, which is why wing backs and inside forward combinations work so well. Your wing back will overlap and your inside forward cuts inside and essentially gives you that extra man in the box, which is very useful when you're playing a 4-2-3-1. The idea behind this 4-4-2 is to try and remain defensively sound by utilising the defensive midfielder in front of the front two, try and constrict the amount of room your opponents have to work with by playing a high line, but simultaneously, unlike a traditional 4-4-2, where it might feel like you sometimes get choked in midfield because you only have 2 midfielders as opposed to 3, up against like a 4-3-3 V shape or a 4-2-3-1, because you use wide playmakers and you play a more patient approach and you get width from your overlapping fullbacks. Essentially what happens is, let's say we're playing out the back, we get the ball in midfield. Your wide playmakers, because they're wide playmakers, one of them will always come narrow. Because that's what wide playmakers do. Coming in from the wing allows a wide playmaker to escape the hustle and bustle of central midfield and can result in him being unmarked by opposition players. So that's why David Luiz was so good playing as a wide playmaker at Man City, because he'd start off wide and he'd always come narrow and give you that 3 in midfield, so it gives you that extra passing option. In the meantime, when that's happening, your other wide playmaker can either come inside as well, which essentially gives you 4 in the middle of the park, with this guy just in front of the back 4, and because your wing backs will overlap, you essentially end up flooding the midfield yourself, which is very different to a traditional 4-4-2 if you think about it, and it really does allow you with this controlled short passing style of play to control the game well and retain possession. But unlike a 4-2-3-1, because you actually have 2 strikers, having 2 strikers not only increases the hustling, it makes life more difficult for your opposition centre-backs and gives them more that they have to worry about. But at the same time, it allows you to get the ball forward a little bit better, which is why if you've been watching the series, you'll see a lot of our goals still, even though, we're playing with a short passing possession style of play, do come from counter-attacks, because you can utilise the 2 strikers up front. When these guys come inside, we still have both strikers as potential pivots, and both strikers can play off each other. That's why both Danny Graham and Andre Gray, specifically early on in the season before this poor run of games, are constantly getting assists to each other. And most of our crosses into the box, and the main reason why our crosses are so successful in resulting in a goal, is because defensively we remain sound, because our defensive midfielder protects the back 2 when these guys overlap. And most of the time this guy's overlapping, this guy will stay back. But because these guys will have gone central, this guy will have pushed into the box. We already have 2 players into the box. This guy will come central as well, so you end up flooding the box as well, which is why a lot of our goals have come from crosses. So that's the idea, really. I don't want to go into too much detail. If you guys want more detail, I can do it, but hopefully that kind of summarizes the style of football that this tactic tries to play. And if you want to download it and play with it yourself, a link is in the description. You probably don't have to tinker the same way I do. I just personally believe that when I tinker, it helps me get the best out of the tactic, even though familiarity drops, because for me, I rate trying to exploit opposition more than tactical familiarity, and I personally believe it's worked pretty well for us so far. So that's it, really. To summarise, your width comes from the overlapping fullbacks. You retain defensive stability, kind of think of Guardiola Barcelona, when Busquets would drop to kind of become a third centre-back. That our defensive midfield doesn't do that, but he still provides that stability. Width comes from the overlapping fullbacks. Your wide playmakers come inside to avoid what happens in a traditional 4-4-2, where it kind of seems like you get outnumbered against 5 in the midfield formations. This doesn't happen because we can always ensure we can supply that extra man, and when the guy comes central, this guy pushes forward, so it doesn't always seem like we actually lack an extra person in the middle of the park. And because we also play with 2 strikers up front, that means assists for days if you can form an awesome partnership with your 2 strikers. And it also means it's a lot easier for your central players, for your midfielders, to get the ball forward, because you've got 2 people to aim for as opposed to only 1 striker in a 4-2-3-1. So that's pretty much it. That's going to be it for this video. I've kind of gone on for a bit now. And that's it. Obviously, there are individual player instructions. Download the tactic. Take a look at it if you are interested. Obviously, those of you guys who have been following this save will know that it's worked pretty well so far, as you'd expect it to. Apologies about my microphone not recording the Arsenal game. So that's going to be it from me, Claudio Ranieri. Just kidding. Or Tinkerman, or whatever the hell you want to call me. And, yeah. Remember to hit the subscribe button. Remember to hit the like button. If you've got any more questions about the approach that has worked well for us so far, let me know. Will we continue this approach next season? I don't know, because it completely depends on the players we end up with. January is coming up soon, when we are in January, so the transfer window should be a fun one. Bad news, though, guys. We've not actually been given any money. We've got 408k to spend. Where is it? 408k to spend. So it's probably going to be quite a quiet transfer window. It's kind of disappointing, really, because I still think we can challenge for Europe. But on that note, thanks for watching.